Idly-ho there, neighbors. It's me again. I know. That's not actually surprising. Well, let's move on. So, this is going to be another one of our Gazetteer breakdowns. This one is Gazetteer 8, Five Shires. Now, the thing with the Five Shires is this is back in D&D when races were classes, and the notion of homogeneous cultures hadn't quite gelled yet. The notion that you could have, here's a culture that includes elves, dwarves, and humans, and so on, in a normal fashion, like people from in New York or from India, English descent, African descent, from the islands, what have you. The cultures that are like that are a lot harder to find in a lot of the older D&D things. It's a lot harder to find in epic fantasy. Now, another thing to keep in mind is this was written well after the point when TSR actually ran into a little bit of problems with the Tolkien estate for trying to publish some Tolkien-related stuff without really getting permission. So that's a thing. So halflings, being more or less a Tolkienian invention in The Hobbit, were occupying a strange place in the overall framework of D&D. And they still do. I kind of go back and forth on halflings. Sometimes I love them, and sometimes I hate that they exist. Halflings in the Tolkienian tradition are pretty much just short humans with a long life. They get to be an allegory for the little people in history. The people who get caught in between and get stepped over and stepped on by the great people of history. And, the overall point is, of course, those great people's lives will often turn on the will of the small people that they step over. And I think that, it's a powerful story, a powerful part of the Tolkienian story. The Lord of the Rings doesn't work if there aren't the hobbits. They humanize it. Without them, it just becomes an epic poem that you don't care about. So, the hobbits are, important. Halflings started out as essentially just hobbits. Well, they had to add some things because, this is just Tolkienian hobbits. Doesn't really work when, the Tolkien estate kind of wants to get paid every time you do that. So, they went with the name Halfling, which was much more generic, a lot less trademarkable, let's say. And they did try and occasionally put some distance between the halfling and the hobbit of Tolkienian tradition without actually making it unrecognizable. So, with that in mind, the Five Shires is about the halflings in the D&D setting. They've added a few bits that you might not have seen in other versions of halflings. They refer to themselves as the hen, and are very insular in the way they live. It's hard to describe based off of the books, but it sort of reminded me of some of the older Jewish communities where people would be welcome fine, but there were just some portions of their lives that were off limits for people who were not of that community. And that's very much the feel you get from the Five Shires. The Five Shires, the Halflings are a friendly and easygoing lot, but they have a secret life all their own that they keep from everybody else. That's one thing that they put in there to sort of separate it out. The other thing that separates it from the traditional Tolkienian Hobbit is that they add a bit more conflict, a bit more history to the Halfling Shires. And their origin is strongly tied to the elves, and when the elves that they were strongly tied to were overrun by orcs, they got ruled by orcs for a while. It's an interesting history, but a lot of it just sort of, here's some generic fantasy history stuff, and instead of humans, we have halflings. I mean, there's not a whole lot to them that is uniquely this race. It's much more like, oh, they're just short humans. The history is a bit by rote, I guess. It's your typical fantasy history. They once were a relatively peace-loving people. They got ruled by strong and aggressive people for a while, and then they got their own, and they gained power, and that began to give them problems, and then they went back to a much simpler life, which is why you end up with the Shires. The leaders in the Shires are called the Sheriffs, and the Sheriffs get together every so often to make decisions for the overall Shire, Five Shires. But generally speaking, they sort of are the law in their given area. And it is sort of what would happen if you contrasted a Hasidic Jewish community and a good old-fashioned English countryside village. And you kind of have the picture of what the Five Shires are like. The book is actually separated into two books. One is a player book. One's a GM book, obviously. The player book includes some extra things for making and playing halfling characters, including influence rules and how your position in the clans affects things and what benefits and downsides you get from that. It also includes something that is a bit unusual for the rest of the Gazetteers, actually. A number of them had included alternate classes. Like there's a druid or a dwarven cleric in the dwarven Gazetteer. There are other sort of, here's another race, another class that you could do with this race. This one, it's more like a prestige class. You sort of opt into it rather than you start out as it, and it's called a master. And the masters are basically halfling druids. They're charged with keeping the Five Shires, the nature of Five Shires, safe. If they try and leave the Five Shires and they don't have a good reason, they could lose all their abilities. So if you wanted to play one, it would behoove you to actually completely adventure in the Five Shires. They can leave, but usually only to deal with a threat to the Shires itself. There's some political stuff that they write up in here. They have some actually fairly detailed write-ups on the histories when you get into the DM side of the book. I enjoyed those. I liked how they wrote them. honestly. I think that they did a good job of making sure that each of the characters had enough room for it to breathe. The only downside I would actually give is that they were maybe too fleshed out and not enough stuff for the game masters to sort of fill in themselves. Now, they, of course, include some listings of monsters that you could use, which is fairly typical, and they have a few new monsters listed in there. The other thing that they talk about is something called the Black Flame, which is sort of a cultural mystery. The Black Flame is, as I understood the write-up, is a manifestation of the energy sphere, which is tied to the whole immortals thing. The different immortals have different spheres, and this one's tied to the energy sphere, and actually could be used as part of your path to immortality. But more than that, the halflings use it as a means of creating magical items, which actually is kind of cool and kind of dumb. The naming on a lot of the items, it's Black Flame this and Black Flame that and Black Flame this and Black. Yeah, guys, we're gonna guess the secret if you keep naming everything the Black Flame blah. So there's that. They give some conversion rules to AD&D, and they give some maps and write-ups about the towns, some adventure hooks. Adventure hooks are a thing, absolutely a thing, in Gazetteers. And this one is no different. They give adventure hooks with lists of... my power just flickered. I'm glad I got a battery backup. Where was I? Oh yeah, they give they list what level range it's appropriate for, what books that you might need to reference, which is nice of them. Honestly, I think that's pretty cool. The overall is that it's a solid book, but it's not all that inspired. It's all right. I think leaning towards a wrap up here. I think it's a good Gazetteer. It's not my favorite, but it's a good, solid, single race culture book. And if you're running games where you just want a separate, race culture for halflings, this one's about as halfling-y as you can get. They do actually include a bit about pirates. Yeah. Well, that's fun. Yeah, I just lost power. So, I'm going to wrap this up. And I'll... Oh, okay. Yeah. Anyways. Where was I? Oh, yes. My computer makes weird noises when the power goes out. Who knew? Yeah. They talk about pirates, and wow, that was super weird. Okay, yeah, they talk about pirates a lot. Apparently, in this particular version of Halfling culture, pirates are a thing, and it's about as close as the Halflings get to having an evil portion to their culture. And the pirates are mainly dominated by women. And they even make a point of telling you that a male outsider trying to get involved in the pirate crew is not going to have an easy time. And it was an interesting addition. The pirates actually make up a great deal of their defense as far as the Navy is concerned, so they are loath to get rid of them. So you have that sort of roguish, reckless element put in there if you want to play a much more reckless halfling. How does it fit into the rest of the world? It fits all right. They have generally friendly relations with a lot of the the cultures that you would have characters come from. They are filled with wonderful little details that make it feel like a relatively real place. Part of the reason for that is the writer. The guy is Ed Greenwood. Now, if you're not familiar with Ed Greenwood, he's the guy who came up with Forgotten Realms. And you can sort of see his Forgotten Realms-esque level of detail. You know, the kinds of food they eat, the languages, the cultural and political and trade elements. He was big on doing that with the Forgotten Realms, and it shows up here in the Gazetteers. As to the art's actually pretty good. What there is of it, it's certainly better than certainly more art than some of the earlier Gazetteers, and the artwork is high quality. But you expect that from TSR, honestly. At this point in their publishing life, they were paying for some of the best fantasy artists out there, and you know, putting them in there. It's only color on the cover, of course, and black and white art inside, but the black and white art is quality. I think that's about it I'm going to say on this one. It didn't have anything that just grabbed me and just like held, but I thought it was nice. If you're running a campaign in Mystara, you know, if you want to do it in the Shires, obviously you'll want this book. I don't know how useful it is to you if you're not interested in doing that. It doesn't cast a whole lot of deeply new insight into halflings in general. You know, halflings are halflings in most settings. They don't really change that much. They are just essentially short humans for the most part, in a way that dwarves aren't, I guess, is one thing to point out. So those are elements to keep in mind, is what I'm saying. But you know what? I think I'm going to wrap it here before I get struck by lightning, because apparently that's a thing now. People getting struck by lightning. Who knew? Well, I knew. Actually, I did. But I am going to recommend this to somebody who is a hardcore Mystara fan. Obviously, you want to get this. And if you're drawing a blank on doing, you know, a halfling-centered community, this is a good book for you, actually, because it sort of gives you a detailed look of what a halfling culture would look like, and halfling history and beliefs and so on. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this one up. Y'all have fun. Subscribe, like, share with all the people, and I will catch you guys later. And now I need to go make sure that the house is not going to burn down or something. Night.